She didn't know his name when she laughed. She didn't know his history when she let him pour her lemon water. She didn't know that the man sitting across from her in that sun-drenched café on the Amalfi Coast had buried 3 men that week and would bury 3 more before Sunday. She only knew his eyes, obsidian, still, watching her like she was the only thing in the world worth watching. And he, a man who had never once lost control of anything, felt something ancient crack open in his chest. Something he had spent 34 years building walls to keep out. What happens when the one woman who cannot be owned becomes the only thing a dangerous man refuses to lose? Welcome back to A Liar Stories. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on post notifications. Your support means everything. Now, enjoy the story. Research shows that intense eye contact between strangers can trigger the same neurological response as falling in love, a cocktail of dopamine, oxytocin, and adrenaline all firing at once. In this story, one glance across a lemon grove cafe will cost 2 people everything. Have you ever locked eyes with a stranger and felt the world tilt? Tell us in the comments. The cafe had no name on the door. That was the first thing Kamsi noticed when she stepped inside. No sign, no menu board, no Instagram handle printed on a chalkboard. Just whitewashed walls, ceramic bowls full of lemons, the smell of espresso and sea salt, and a low ceiling draped in dried herbs. It felt like a place that had always existed and would continue to exist long after the rest of the world forgot how to be quiet. She had come to the Amalfi Coast for exactly that quiet. 3 months after the promotion that swallowed her life, 2 months after the relationship that left her hollowed out, and 6 weeks into a solo trip she'd booked at 2 in the morning while sitting on her bathroom floor, Kamsi Obi was finally learning to breathe again. She was 28, Igbo, born in Enugu and raised between Lagos and Atlanta, and she carried herself the way her mother had taught her, back straight, chin up, even when everything inside was unsteady. She chose a table near the window. The light fell across her face in long golden ribbons, catching the deep warmth of her brown skin, the soft curve of her jaw. She had her journal open before the seat was warm, old habit, and she was mid-sentence when the chair across from her moved. She looked up. He was already sitting down. Not asking. Not explaining. Simply there, like gravity, like weather, like something that had always been on its way to that exact chair at that exact moment. He was Korean. Tall, even seated. Broad across the shoulders in a way that made the linen shirt he wore look like a deliberate decision. Sharp jaw, sharper eyes, the kind of face that had been arranged by the universe with uncommon precision. He set a glass of still water on the table, looked at her once, then looked out the window at the sea. "The other tables are full," he said. His accent was mild, clean, the English deliberate. Kamsi looked around. Every other table was, in fact, occupied. She hadn't noticed. She said nothing for a moment, studying him the way she studied everything carefully, without rush. There was something about him that didn't fit the cafe. Not his clothes, which were simple. Not his posture, which was controlled rather than relaxed. It was something behind the eyes. A stillness that wasn't peace. More like a man who had trained himself never to flinch. "You could have asked," she said finally. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement. "I could have," he agreed. She went back to her journal. He looked back at the sea. And somehow, impossibly, the silence between 2 strangers became the most comfortable thing Kamsi had felt in months. His name, she would learn much later, was Ha-joon. Ha-joon. And the 3 men he had buried that week were associates who had made the catastrophic mistake of skimming from his operations across Naples and Palermo. He had come to the Amalfi Coast for 2 days, a meeting with a Sicilian contact, a brief window of stillness before the next crisis, and he had walked into this cafe because one of his men had recommended the espresso. He had not expected the woman with the journal. He had not expected to stay for 2 hours. But she laughed at something she was writing, a quiet, unguarded sound, completely unself-conscious, and Ha-joon, who had not been caught off guard by anything in 11 years, found himself watching her like she was a problem he needed to understand. She was beautiful in a way that disrupted him. Not fragile, not ornamental. There was weight to her, a fullness of presence, curves that moved with natural authority, eyes that were warm but not naive. She spoke to the old cafe owner in broken Italian that was charming rather than embarrassing. She tipped generously. She read the menu like it genuinely interested her. She was, Ha-joon realized with something approaching irritation, completely real. He was not accustomed to real. When she finally closed her journal and looked at him directly, she asked, without preamble, "Do you always sit with strangers without asking?" "No," he said. And that was true. He had never done this before in his life. Then why today? He considered the honest answer, decided against it, and said, "The espresso here is better shared." She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that made lesser men confess things, and then she laughed again. Softer this time. More private. "I'm Kamsi," she said. He paused one beat too long before answering. In his world, names were architecture, the beginning of exposure. But something about the directness of her gaze made evasion feel small. "Ha-joon," he said. They talked for 40 minutes. About the coast. About travel. About what it meant to leave a place and not be sure if you were running away from it or toward something else. She told him she was from Nigeria originally, that she'd lived in the States for years, that she was a cultural content strategist, whatever that meant. She added with a dry smile, and that she had started this trip with a plan and abandoned it by day 3. He told her almost nothing. He said he was in business. She didn't press. When he stood to leave, he was aware, with the clinical precision of a man trained to assess every room, that he did not want to go. That awareness disturbed him more than any threat had in recent memory. "Enjoy your coast," he said. "Enjoy your business," she replied, already opening her journal again. He walked out into the blinding Amalfi sun, got into the car where his head of security, a quiet man named Daesung, was waiting. Daesung said nothing because Daesung was very good at reading atmospheres. Ha-joon stared at the road for 3 long seconds. "Change the dinner reservation," he said. "Push it 2 hours." He was back in the cafe by 3 o'clock. She was still there on her second coffee, reading now. She looked up when he walked in. She did not look surprised. That somehow made it worse for him. "Forgot something?" she asked. "Yes," he said, and sat back down. The following 3 days should not have happened. Ha-joon had meetings. He had a Sicilian contact who was already agitated about a delayed shipment. He had a lieutenant in Seoul who had been sending increasingly urgent messages about a power struggle threatening the Eastern operations. He had, in the most literal sense, an empire to run, one built over a decade of ruthless decisions, strategic marriages of convenience, and a reputation so fearsome that men twice his size lowered their eyes when he entered rooms. None of it pulled at him the way Kamsi did. She was staying at a small hotel 2 kilometers up the cliff road, a place she'd found through a travel blog, she said, not a 5-star resort, and each morning she walked down to the water or to the market or, increasingly, to a different cafe or restaurant where she would inevitably find Ha-joon already there, or arrive to find him appearing shortly after. She noticed. She wasn't a woman who missed things. On the second day, walking along a narrow stone path above the water, she stopped and turned to face him. "Ha-joon, are you following me?" He met her eyes with complete composure. "We keep choosing the same places." "That's a very careful answer." "I'm a careful man." She studied him. That slow, thorough way she had, like she was reading something written behind his face. He held completely still under it. Most people looked away from his gaze. She held it like it cost her nothing. "What do you actually do?" she asked. "Import and export," he said. "Logistics. She turned and kept walking. "You have the energy of someone who makes decisions that can't be undone." He said nothing. Because she was right, and because he had no idea what to do with a woman who could read that from a 3-day acquaintance. That evening, they had dinner on a terrace overlooking the sea. Not by plan. They had simply both been walking in the same direction, and she had said, without looking at him, "I'm hungry," and he had said, "There's a good place 2 streets over," and neither of them acknowledged what was clearly happening. Over grilled branzino and white wine, She told him about her grandmother, a woman from Enugu who had never left Nigeria but had read everything, knew everything, and had once told Kamsi that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was make herself small for a man who hadn't earned her fullness. Ha-joon listened to every word. He could not remember the last time he had listened to someone the way he listened to her. In his world, conversations were transactions. Even the ones dressed up as intimacy. People wanted something. Always. He had learned to identify what it was within the first 3 minutes and calibrate accordingly. Kamsi didn't want anything from him. She spoke like she was simply thinking out loud in his presence, offering the thoughts freely, without expectation, without agenda. It was the most disarming thing he had ever encountered. When the wine was done and the stars were unreasonably present overhead, she looked at him and said, "You're not what you look like." "What do I look like?" "Untouchable," she said simply. "But you're not." The silence that followed was the longest Ha-joon had sat in without filling it for a very long time. "No," he said finally, very quietly. "I'm not." He left for Naples the next morning, earlier than scheduled, because he was a man who had survived by knowing when something had the power to alter the architecture of his life, and for the first time in 11 years, something did. He told himself the distance would be enough, that whatever pull she had on him would dilute naturally, the way everything did once you removed it from context. He was wrong. He knew he was wrong before the car had cleared the coast road. 6 weeks later, Kamsi was back in Atlanta. She was in her apartment, the good one she'd finally leased after years of living practically in the neighborhood she actually wanted, when her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. International prefix. She almost didn't answer. "You moved back," said the voice on the other end. She went completely still. "Ha-joon, how was the rest of your trip?" She sat down slowly. "How do you have this number?" A pause. "Careful, as always. You gave it to the café. For the reservation I made on the second day." She had. She remembered now. She pressed her hand flat against the kitchen counter and breathed. "It's been 6 weeks," she said. "Yes. Why no?" Another pause. Longer. Like he was measuring something he wasn't accustomed to measuring. "I'm in New York," he said. "Business. I'd like to take you to dinner." "Ha-joon, you're in New York and I'm in Atlanta. I'm aware of the geography." She laughed, that surprised, disbelieving laugh that she reserved for things that were too absurd to take seriously. But underneath the laugh was something else. Something that had been quietly present since the Amalfi Coast, since a man had sat down across from her without asking and watched the sea like he was personally responsible for keeping it calm. "One dinner," she said. "One dinner," he agreed. She flew to New York that Friday. He met her at the restaurant himself, not a driver, not an assistant. Him, in a dark coat, standing outside in the October cold like he had been there a while. Like punctuality was the least he could do. Over the course of that dinner, she learned 3 more things about Ha-joon that she filed away quietly. He noticed everything, he forgot nothing, and when he looked at her, it was with the focused intensity of a man who had decided something and was no longer questioning it. She didn't know yet what he had decided, but she felt it, like barometric pressure before a storm. They walked after dinner, through Midtown, through the noise and the cold, and at some point their hands were close enough that the backs of their fingers brushed, and neither of them moved away. "Tell me something true," she said, not looking at him. He was quiet for a moment. "I think about you," he said, "more than I think about anything else. And I don't know what to do with that." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. And the city kept going around them, cabs, noise, steam from grates, the indifferent machinery of New York, while Kamsi looked up at Ha-joon and understood, with a clarity that was almost frightening, that this was not going to be simple. That this man was not simple. That whatever he was, whatever he carried, whatever he protected himself from and protected others with, he was something she had no map for. But her grandmother's voice was in her head. Not the warning. The other part. "The women in our line," her grandmother had said once, "have never been afraid of fire. Only of cold." Ha-joon was watching her with those obsidian eyes, waiting, for the first time she'd seen, with something that looked like vulnerability at its edges. She reached out and lightly touched his hand. Not a promise. Not a surrender. Just contact. Just real. And Ha-joon, who had not been touched gently in longer than he could accurately remember, breathed out like something inside him had been waiting years for permission. Quick pause. If this story has you hooked, tap like and drop your thoughts below. Now, back to the story. The weeks that followed were the quietest war Ha-joon had ever fought. Not with enemies. Not with rivals. With himself. He had built his life on one governing principle: nothing personal. Every relationship, every alliance, every loyalty, every carefully maintained distance existed in service of the empire. Emotion was a liability. Attachment was a door left unlocked. He had watched men far stronger than himself be dismantled by love, by need, by the particular vulnerability of wanting one specific person to still be there in the morning. He had promised himself at 23, standing at the grave of the man who had first mentored him into this life, that he would never be that undone. And then there was Kamsi. She did not try to get inside his life. That was the thing that made it impossible to defend against. She didn't ask about his business or his money or his connections. She didn't push at the edges of what he wouldn't say. She simply lived fully, freely, with a warmth and self-possession that made every room she occupied feel more real than the rooms without her. They began talking every night. Not by arrangement. It simply became what happened. She would call, or he would, and an hour would pass the way hours only passed in sleep or in deep water, without weight. She was funny. Ha-joon had not anticipated that. She had a dry, precise wit that arrived without warning and landed with perfect timing, and the first time she made him laugh, genuinely, low and unguarded, she went quiet on the other end of the line like she was storing the sound away somewhere. "You should do that more," she said. "Do what?" "Sound like a human being." He said nothing, but something in his chest shifted a degree he couldn't reverse. By November, he was in Atlanta twice a month. By December, his security team had quietly mapped every route between his Buckhead hotel and her apartment in Inman Park, had identified every variable on her daily pattern, and had flagged 3 individuals in her broader social orbit as requiring low-level monitoring. Ha-joon reviewed the reports himself. He told Daesung nothing about why. He didn't need to. Daesung had served him for 9 years. He knew what it looked like when Ha-joon cared about something. It looked like preparation. It looked like control. It looked, from the outside, exactly like every other strategic decision Ha-joon made. Only Ha-joon knew the difference. The trouble with Tobias Laurent arrived at a gallery opening in Midtown Atlanta on a Friday in late December. Kamsi had invited Ha-joon. Her friend Adiz was showing work, she'd said, and it would be low-key and full of interesting people, and Ha-joon had come because she'd asked, which was reason enough. He stood slightly apart from the crowd in the way men with security details learn to stand, present but not crowded, aware of every exit, every face. He was watching Kamsi across the room when Tobias Laurent arrived. Laurent was French-American, a gallerist with a very obvious opinion of himself, tall, aesthetic, the kind of handsome that required an audience. He had known Kamsi, Ha-joon gathered quickly, from her years in New York. The way he crossed the room to her was not the walk of an acquaintance. It was the walk of a man who believed he still had a standing invitation. He touched her arm first, then her shoulder. Then he leaned close to say something, and Kamsi laughed, a different laugh than the one Ha-joon had catalogued, more social, more polite, and Laurent kept his hand at the small of her back for 4 full seconds after she'd shifted slightly away from it. Ha-joon set his glass down with very deliberate care. Daesung appeared at his elbow. "He's nobody," Daesung said quietly. "Art world. No connections worth noting." "I know who he is," Ha-joon said. "Then you know there's no threat." Ha-joon said nothing. Because the threat wasn't to his empire. And that was the problem. He crossed the room with the even, unhurried pace of a man who owned the floor he walked on. He arrived at Kamsi's side and said nothing, simply stood there, close enough that Laurent's hand fell away from her back by the law of social physics alone. Kamsi looked up at Ha-joon with a raised eyebrow that was partly amusement and partly something sharper. "Ha-joon," she said. This is Tobias. Old friend. Ha-joon looked at Laurent with the precise expression he used in rooms where he wanted people to remember who they were dealing with, not threatening, simply clarifying, and extended his hand. Ha-joon, he said. Laurent shook it. Laurent was smart enough, or old enough, to feel the atmosphere shift. He recovered gracefully, made 2 minutes of conversation, and then excused himself with the easy charm of a man who had been in enough rooms to know when one had turned against him. When he was gone, Kamsi turned to Ha-joon fully. That was unnecessary, she said. Her voice was even. Not angry. Measuring. I came to stand beside you, he said. That's all. You came to establish something. He met her eyes. He didn't deny it. She looked at him for a long moment, that deep, reading look, and something complicated moved through her expression. Not quite anger. Not quite flattered. Something in between that she seemed unwilling to simplify. We are going to have a conversation, she said, about what you think this is. Yes, he said. We are. But not that night. That night, Adi's work sold 3 pieces, the champagne was good, and Ha-joon stood with Kamsi through all of it. Not possessively, not visibly, just present. Just there. And when she reached back for his hand in the middle of a conversation without even looking, simply reaching, the way you reach for something you've already decided belongs within reach, he held it like it was the most natural thing he'd ever done. The conversation happened 2 weeks later, in her apartment, on a Sunday. She made tea. Nigerian spiced tea, the kind her mother had taught her. He sat at her kitchen table, always somewhat foreign-looking in domestic spaces, too contained, too still, and watched her move around the kitchen with an ease she had in no other context. I know you have people watching me, she said, not turning around. He was quiet for exactly 1 second. Yes. She turned. How long? Since November. She looked at him steadily. He looked back. He had learned, by now, not to offer her anything less than truth. She had a way of knowing the difference between an answer and a deflection, and she received deflections with a quiet disappointment that was worse than anger. Why? She asked. Because there are people in my world who would use you to get to me, he said. And I could not allow that. Ha-joon. She set the cups down and sat across from him. What world are you in? The question hung in the kitchen air between them. Simple. Direct. The question she had been patient enough to wait months to ask. He had prepared for this. He had considered, in the careful way he considered everything, what version of the truth to offer. How much? In what order? He had strategies prepared like exits on a map. He used none of them. I run an organization, he said. It operates across Korea, Japan, Italy, and parts of the US. It is not legal. I have spent my adult life building it, and I have done things to build it that I would not describe to you over tea. He held her gaze. I am telling you this, because you deserve to know what you are sitting across from. The kitchen was very quiet. Kamsi wrapped both hands around her cup. Are you dangerous? She asked. To you? No. Never. To others. A pause. Yes. She nodded slowly. Not flinching. Processing. He watched her the way he watched things that mattered, with full attention, with a willingness to accept whatever came next. I need a few days, she said finally. Take what you need, he said. And he meant it completely, even as something in him braced for a weight it didn't know how to carry. She didn't call for 4 days. They were the longest 4 days Ha-joon had experienced since his early years, before he learned to convert anxiety into action. He ran operations from his New York office with complete competence, signed off on 3 negotiations, resolved a distribution conflict in Osaka over a 40-minute call. He was fully functional. He was also, beneath every efficient surface, completely unraveling. On day 5, Daesung knocked on the office door. She's not at the apartment, he said. Ha-joon looked up. Her location has been static for 31 hours. Her phone stopped pinging at 11 p.m. Thursday. Ha-joon was standing before Daesung finished the sentence. What Ha-joon did not know, what Kamsi did not know, was that a rival faction operating out of Miami had been tracking his movements for 2 months. They'd identified his pattern of Atlanta visits. They'd identified her. She had not been taken by strangers. She had been taken by people who knew exactly whose orbit she was in and had decided she was leverage. Ha-joon found out where she was in 11 hours. He did not wait for lawyers or negotiators or official channels. He got in a car with 4 men he trusted with his life and drove through the night with the kind of silence that precedes something final. The warehouse on the outskirts of Savannah was guarded by 9 men. Ha-joon left with Kamsi. He left nothing else standing. She was unharmed. Shaken badly, deeply shaken, but physically whole. He found her in a back room, wrists zip-tied to a chair, and the moment he came through the door, she made a sound he would spend the rest of his life trying to forget. Not fear. Relief. Broken, full-body relief. He cut her hands free and she gripped his jacket with both fists and pressed her forehead to his chest, and he held her with everything, both arms, no performance, no calculation, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was not the voice he used in boardrooms or in rooms where men were afraid of him. It was just his voice. Raw and low and real. "I have you," he said. "I have you. You're safe," she cried. She hadn't let herself until that moment. He held her until she stopped. He did not rush her. He did not speak. He simply absorbed every shudder and gave nothing back but steadiness. Back in Atlanta, in the private medical suite he had arranged within 3 phone calls, a doctor confirmed she was uninjured. Ha-joon sat outside the room for 40 minutes and felt something move through him that he had no name for, something vast and cold and furious and grateful all at once, settling into a decision that had already been made. He understood now, long before tonight. When she was alone and resting and the medical staff had stepped out, he went in. She was sitting up, wrapped in a blanket, looking out the window at the Atlanta skyline. She looked smaller than she ever had. Also, somehow more herself, stripped down to something essential and true. "Ha-joon," she said softly. "I know," he said. He sat beside her. "Close. I know what I am. I know what tonight cost you. And I know that everything I said in your kitchen was exactly why I should have stayed away from you." He paused. "But I can't tell you I'm sorry for any of it, because that would be a lie, and I have tried very hard not to lie to you." She looked at him, eyes wet but clear. "I was afraid," she said, "for 4 days. Not of them. Of what you'd told me. Afraid that I'd already fallen in love with someone I didn't fully know." She exhaled. "And then tonight I was afraid of losing you before I'd told you." Everything in the room seemed to stop. "Told me what?" he said. Very carefully. She reached out and touched his jaw. Her fingers were still slightly unsteady. He turned his face into her hand like it was the most instinctive thing he had ever done. "That I love you," she said. "That I've loved you since you sat down at my table without asking, and then had the audacity to come back." Ha-joon closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were dark and full and unguarded in a way she had never seen. Unguarded the way a man only gets when he's stopped fighting something and let it win. "Kamsi." His voice barely carried. "I have been in love with you since the Amalfi Coast. Since the moment you laughed at something you were writing and made me feel like I had been living inside a room with no windows and someone had finally knocked a wall down." She made a sound soft and overwhelmed and almost laughing and leaned forward, and he met her halfway. Whatever came next faded the way things do when they finally arrived, when the world softens and the distance closes and 2 people find themselves in the only place that has ever made sense to either of them. The night did the rest. 6 months later, Ha-joon began a process he had been quietly engineering since January, the most complex, careful, and deliberate restructuring of his life's work that his organization had ever seen. Not an exit. A transformation. Legal infrastructure layered over the framework that had always existed beneath. Legitimate acquisitions in logistics, in import, in international commerce, all things he already understood. Dae-sung became head of security for a holding company. 3 lieutenants became regional directors. He did not pretend the past could be undone. He also did not pretend the future was fixed. What he knew was that Kamsi had not asked him to change. She had simply, through the full force of loving him honestly, made him want to become someone who deserved to be loved that way. On a Saturday in September on the Amalfi Coast, at a terrace above the sea, at a dinner that Kamsi believed was a simple anniversary trip, Ha-joon reached into his jacket pocket and set a ring on the table in front of her. Not in a box. Just the ring on the white tablecloth in the last of the evening light. She looked at it, then at him. Ha-joon. You told me once, he said, that your grandmother said the most dangerous thing a woman could do was make herself small for a man who hadn't earned her fullness. He held her gaze. I want to spend the rest of my life being a man who has earned it. If you'll let me. Kamsi pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her eyes were full. The sea below was doing something beautiful, moving gold and slow, like it was participating. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. He slid the ring on her finger. She grabbed his hand with both of hers and held it against her chest, over her heart, and he felt it beating, steady and strong and completely real. The following spring, in a small ceremony in Enugu attended by her mother, 3 aunts, Adis, and a handful of people who genuinely mattered, Ha-joon and Kamsi married at sunset. There were no speeches that tried to explain them. Some things were past explaining. At the reception, her mother, a regal woman with Kamsi's eyes and twice the stillness, held Ha-joon's face in both hands for a moment and looked at him the way only mothers look, measuring, ancient, thorough. You will not make her cry, she said. Not a warning. A statement of what was now true. No, Ma, he said. I won't. For months later, Kamsi sat on the edge of their bed in the house they'd found together in a quiet corner of Seoul. Close enough to his world, she'd said, that she could understand it, far enough from the noise that she could still hear herself think. And she held a white stick and stared at 2 pink lines. She looked up. Ha-joon was standing in the doorway. He had come in silently, which was his nature, but his eyes, when they found the thing in her hands, did something she had only seen once before. That same unguarded quality. That same wall coming down. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her. He did not speak for a long moment. He simply took her hands in his, both of them, and pressed them gently. Like a man holding something he had spent his whole life not knowing he was looking for. We're going to need more lemon trees, he said finally, very quietly. She laughed. Fully, freely, the real one, the unrehearsed one. The one he had first heard in a café with no name on a coast where the world had been soft and untouched and 2 people who had no business finding each other had found each other anyway. He kissed her forehead, then her hands. Then he rested his own forehead against hers, eyes closed, breathing like someone who had finally, after everything, come home. And the world outside was beautiful and complicated and full of consequence. But in that room, in that moment, everything was still. If this story pulled you in, like, comment your thoughts and stay subscribed, there's more coming.